All right, welcome back everyone for another deep dive. Today we're going to be jumping into a book that I'm sure a lot of you have at least heard of.
Yeah, it's classic.
It is. We're going to be talking about 1984 by George Orwell.
Oh, excellent choice.
And we're going to be using this fantastic analysis that somebody was kind enough to send in.
Looking forward to it.
So we're going to be exploring how this book, which was written back in 1949, quite a while ago.
Yeah, way back.
It really is.
Yeah.
How is it still so relevant to the world we live in today? That's kind of our mission for this deep dive.
It's amazing how a book written that long ago can still feel so relevant. Like it was written for today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It really is. So to kind of kick things off, maybe we could start with how much of Orwell's dystopian vision, the kind of steery future he imagined, is actually happening around us already?
Well, that's a great question to start with. One of the things that really strikes me about 1984 is how the party, the ruling party in the book, maintains such a tight grip on power. And they do this by really controlling the information that people have access to. It's all about propaganda and manipulating language in a way that's incredibly effective.
Right, and you're talking about concepts like doublethink and the whole Ministry of Truth, that whole thing.
Exactly. Those are perfect examples. Doublethink, that's particularly messed up. I mean, it's the ability to hold two completely contradictory beliefs in your mind at the same time and somehow accept them both as true.
Yeah, I don't even know how.
It just blows your mind. And it basically destroys any chance of critical thinking because you're constantly being bombarded with this conflicting information. It's like you're forced to try and make sense of things that just don't make sense.
Yeah, it's really mind-boggling when you try to think about it. And then, of course, you've got the Ministry of Truth, which, the irony is just incredible. It's the Ministry of Truth, but it's actually in charge of spreading lies and rewriting history.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what makes it even more chilling is that Winston, the main character, actually works at the Ministry of Truth.
He does.
He's part of this machine that's manufacturing this fake reality.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder, how much of what we take for granted, how much of what we accept as the truth, how much of that is actually just carefully constructed narratives.
That is such a good point. And it makes me think about, how easy it is to get sucked into these filter bubbles online.
Yeah.
Where you're only seeing information that already agrees with what you already think.
That's a great parallel. These algorithms on social media, they're meant to kind of personalize our experience, and that's cool. But at the same time, they can create these echo chambers. It's like we're only hearing from people who already agree with us, and then we rarely ever get challenged or see a different perspective.
I think we're all living in our own little Ministry of Truth, right?
Kind of, yeah. Our own little versions of it, and they're being curated by these algorithms.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal because it affects how we form our opinions, how we have discussions and debates, and even just how we see the world around us. It makes you wonder if it's even possible to break free from these bubbles and get a more balanced view of things.
It's definitely a challenge. And, speaking of challenges, 1984 also gives us this really creepy picture of what it's like to live in a surveillance state where, citizens are constantly being watched by Big Brother. And, of course, you've got the thought police.
Yeah, it's like you can never relax. There are telescreens everywhere, and they can see and hear everything you do.
Tracy.
It's a total invasion of privacy, and it creates this atmosphere of constant fear and paranoia, like you're afraid to even think certain thoughts because you're worried about the thought police coming after you.
It's funny because that whole feeling of being watched, it really connects with a lot of anxieties people have today about government surveillance, and the whole thing with data collection.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about how much information is being gathered about us just from our online activity, like every website we visit, every search we make, every post we like. It's all being tracked.
It is. It really makes you wonder, do you ever get that feeling like someone's always looking over your shoulder when you're online?
Yeah, all the time. And it's a valid concern. I mean, while some level of surveillance might be necessary, for security reasons and stuff, but there's no doubt that it can be abused. It's all about finding that balance, right? How do we stay safe but also protect our privacy in this digital age? It's a tough question.
Yeah, it's a question we all have to wrestle with these days. And, it's interesting because another thing that really stood out to me in 1984 is how the party goes about controlling language. And they're doing it as a way to control people's thoughts, which is just wild when you think about it.
Oh, yeah. The whole idea of Newspeak is so brilliant. and so creepy at the same time. It's like by simplifying the language and getting rid of words related to rebellion or anything like that, they're basically limiting what people can even think about.
Just like you can't even form the thought if you don't have the words for it, right?
Exactly. It's mental imprisonment through language.
That's a great way to put it.
And, I mean, who knows? Maybe it's happening today, too. Not as blatant as Newspeak, obviously, but in a more subtle way, right?
Yeah, maybe. Maybe. I mean, think about how certain words or phrases can instantly become taboo, almost like you're not allowed to say them. And that totally affects how we can even talk about certain topics.
Yeah, for sure. The way we use language has a huge impact on how we think and how we communicate. I mean, look at all the debates about censorship and political correctness and how easy it is for certain words to get twisted and used against people, to shut them up.
Yeah, it's like weaponizing language.
Hmm.
And it's not just about individual words either, right?
Yeah.
It's also about the way information is presented, the whole framing of the narrative. It reminds me of Winston and what he did at the Ministry of Truth.
Yeah.
He was literally rewriting history to fit the party's agenda.
Oh, yeah. That's a classic example of how language can be used to totally distort reality. And it's so relevant to what we see today, right?
Yeah.
Fake news, misinformation, all over the internet.
Oh, totally.
It's like we need to be so much more careful about what we read and what we believe. We really need to question everything, check the sources, all that stuff.
Yeah, we need to be our own Newspeak detectors, I guess. Filter out all the propaganda and try to find the truth in all this craziness.
Right. We have to be critical thinkers. We got to learn to spot the ways that people try to mess with our heads, you know? They can manipulate our thoughts and emotions with language, but we don't have to fall for it.
Definitely. It makes you think about the mental strain, too. In the book, Winston is constantly battling to hold on to who he is. He's fighting against all that pressure to conform, to just be another cog in the machine.
His internal struggle is so intense. I mean, here's a guy, he's longing for freedom, for truth, for real human connection, and it's all denied to him. And his love affair with Julia, that's a huge act of rebellion, right? It's like a big middle finger to the party and their control.
Oh, yeah, totally. And then you have that scene where Winston breaks down, where he's tortured and he ends up betraying Julia. It's brutal.
That scene, it's just heartbreaking, man. It shows how far these totalitarian regimes will go, They don't want to just control what you do. They want to control your mind, your heart. It's like they're trying to crush the human spirit completely.
Yeah, it's a heavy scene for sure. Makes you wonder, how much any of us could handle that kind of pressure. Could we hold on to what we believe in, to who we are, if we were facing that kind of, I don't know, like a constant attack on everything you think and feel?
It's a tough question, man, and it stays with you. But even with all that darkness, that bleakness in the book, I think there's also a little bit of hope in Winston's story.
Really? What do you mean?
I mean, yeah, he's broken in the end, right, by the party. But the fact that he fought back at all, even for a little while, that he dared to love Julia, to try to find the truth, to imagine a different world, that shows how strong the human spirit can be, even when everything's stacked against you.
I see what you mean. It's like, even in the worst circumstances, even when it seems like there's no hope left, there's still that spark, that refusal to give in completely.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the big reasons why 1984 still hits so hard, why it's still relevant. It's definitely a warning, but it's also a call to action. It's like Orwell is saying, hey, pay attention, question everything, don't let this happen.
It's a powerful message. Well, this has been quite the journey. Our deep dive into 1984, definitely eye-opening and a lot to think about, that's for sure. We've covered a lot of ground, from the dangers of propaganda and, the surveillance state stuff, to the power of language and how important it is to think critically.
Yeah, it's amazing how so many of the themes that Orwell was writing about back then, they're still so relevant what's going on in the world today, especially with how connected we are now with the internet and everything.
Absolutely. So, as we wrap things up here, what would you say are the key takeaways from 1984, the things you really want our listeners to remember?
Good question. I guess the most important thing is to never forget that the fight for freedom, for truth, it never really ends. It's something we have to constantly be working at. We have to be aware of how power can be used in the wrong way, how information can be twisted and manipulated, and how language itself can be used to control us.
And we can't forget about the human cost of all this. What happens to people when they live under oppression, both individually and as a society? 1984, it's a pretty stark warning about what can happen when fear and conformity take over.
It's a cautionary tale, for sure, but it's also a call to action. It reminds us that we all have a responsibility to speak up when we see injustice, to challenge the way things are, and to fight for what we believe in.
Well said. So, to everyone listening out there, as you go about your day, think about what you can do, even small things, to make sure that the world of 1984 doesn't become our reality.
Yeah, what can you do to bring a little more truth into the world? To encourage people to think for themselves, to protect the freedoms that make us human? It's up to all of us to find the answers.